Amy and Tabitha, and we are going off the rails today, and we are going to talk about why sometimes we do like that story that doesn't have all the subtlety and complexity of real life, why we're drawn to comic books, why we're drawn to those heroes. So Tab, you had a thought on that.
I did have a thought. Well, what I was going to say is I think that, there is something satisfying about it's a satisfying ending, right? Where the good guys win. Like we want that to be the world, and it isn't always. So how lovely when we can create a story and find a solution that works and everybody goes home happily ever after, or at least happy enough for now. But I was thinking about how you can create that we do create that even in our more complex storytelling, and we do that by keeping a character, by having a character have a win, or a personal even if the world around them fell down around them, a character that maintains their integrity and doesn't give up hope, I would say, and continues to try, that is a victory, right? That does feel satisfying to us. So we can find those moments of satisfaction and of like clean, I don't want to say clean endings, but like a satisfying ending, a happy ending, even if the world was more complex and now they're living in a more complex world, if they stay pure in their heart, or in their hopefulness. So I don't know, I was just thinking
or if they get what they can, what's available in that world, what's available to their circumstances, because sometimes when a writer stretches too far and it's not believable, that isn't satisfying.
Right. It's not satisfying.
So understanding it, this goes back to one of the other ones we were talking about, is it has to make sense to your reader, and you have to have set things up so that when this thing happens, it makes sense for the character and it makes sense for the world
in the story itself.
I still don't think this is that is as good a one, so we're probably going to scrap it.
I was going to say we could keep talking about endings, because ending a story, ending in general.
See? That you just made an example.
We just found the next bar. We went in. We salvaged our evening. That's what we just did right here. Anyway, endings.
But it's also what. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Whatever you're going to say.
You kept hope alive. I was ready to throw in the towel.
And I kept hope alive.
And what that character does. Okay. So endings. Okay.
So more about endings. Yeah, we're just going to keep talking all over one another. The other thing is we haven't seen each other in a week. So we have so much to talk about personally that we're kind of like, we're just going to kind of go off on our tangents together and talk about things. So yeah.
That's fine. Okay. So endings are so important.
They are so important. And I think that's one of the things I ask my beta readers when they're reading a draft is, was this ending satisfying to you? When you got there, were you like, yes, she nailed this ending, even if it's not a happy ending necessarily, right? So first thing is know your genre and know if there are reader expectations about an ending. And the one that comes to mind for me is romances. You must have a happy ending in a romance, or it's not really technically a romance. That's one of the defining factors. So no matter how complicated things got, no matter, the traumas and dramas that the characters have had to go through, they all need to end up happy in the end, right? And that is part of the deal. Not so much with, you can have literary stuff, you can have other things that don't necessarily have a happy ending, but the ending should fit the story. It should be like, yes, that's the right ending, and the reader should feel that. So you should feel it as the writer. You should feel like, yes, you feel it resonating in your heart, I would say, if it's the right ending, and your reader should feel the same thing. I don't know.
So that just sparked in my mind. You helped me with the idea of how to end a book that is going to be part of a series. So what are your thoughts on that? What's recommended if you're going to be writing the next one?
Right. But some folks write the cliffhanger ending so that you can, you're going to turn the page and immediately download or purchase that next book or go see I find that to be a little bit frustrating as a reader, especially if it's months and months and months until the sequel comes out or is, downloadable or whatever.
Or a year, or a
Yeah,
year.
and that's that can happen. So I find a more satisfying reader experience, at least in some of these, I would say the genre fiction arenas, is to complete something in your first story, like solve something, get an answer to something. Even though we know as the reader and the writer that the world is bigger, more things are coming down the road, we know, just give a sense of completion for that portion of it while leaving enough open to keep readers wanting to go on to the next story, right? So you can do that many different ways. It depends on the plot of your story, but just give them something complete at the end. As
Right. And if that is the end, you're focused on that. So even though the reader knows full well there's this large unsolved problem, the focus is on something immediate and solved. And I had always thought that you want to leave it in that cliffhanger place, but since you had told me that you find, for the most part, having something that sort of ends it in a way is just it makes it more of a book too. Like,
right.
I don't know. Like, do you sometimes feel like it's kind of like cheating if you don't do something that completes this book and you're just going to write the next one?
I kind of feel like then you didn't finish the arc of the book.
Right,
There's an arc to the trilogy. There could be an arc to the series, right? But each book should have an arc, just like each scene within the book has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When you watch a scene on television, you're like, an action scene or a love scene or something, there's a discrete chunk of information, drama that happened during that time. It's similar in your book. And I think, you have these smaller, of course you have your bridge scenes where the quiet moments or the bridging times, but you recognize what a scene feels like over time, right? As a writer and a reader, you surely do. And I think you recognize when a book feels complete, even though the bigger story is still going on, like that's enough for this round. Basically we've gotten them to this place, they've solved this thing, something big has been revealed and now they know what they have to do next. Whatever. There are many ways to do that still has the sense of the arc coming around, right? And even though it's an arc within an arc. That's all.
Right. And actually, if you let it sit for a little bit, you find that place, because the one that I just wrote, I also apparently wrote part of the next book without realizing it. I kept on going, and then as I was doing that, I was like, "Ooh, this is really what should be in book 2." And I didn't realize that when I was in the middle of it, but after you go back and read it, sometimes you can find, oh, here's a more intuitive, natural break where all this has happened, and you don't want to introduce new conflict right as you're solving your thing.
Well, that I think too, there's a pacing element to an entire series, right? We talk about pacing our scenes and pacing our chapters and pacing the whole novel. And I think there's a pacing to, when you're writing more than one, right? And how that kind of ebbs and flows, and giving your readers a moment to breathe, right? Like, just like your characters need a moment to breathe. I remember I read one book and it was just the single book, and I think it was going to have a sequel. And I was so exhausted by the time I finished it. And it was a very good story. And it was a very compelling world. There was a lot to love about it, but there was no outbreath ever in the whole thing. It was constant, one action scene to the next, to the next, to the next. And I'm like, these characters are just going to keel over and drop dead because they're exhausted. I'm exhausted as the reader. So I think there's something about creating an ending that allows for an out breath for a moment, before we pick up and go to the next story, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. I was actually, speaking of mind wandering, I was actually thinking that there are some violin compositions by Paganini that do that. They get to that tension, and then you don't get to go down and relax, you go right back up to the tension. And that was the way that he composed, to keep it in that crazy spot,
Yeah.
but that is not necessarily what you're looking to do when you have a book. But there's always exceptions too. I'm sure there's
Of
somebody out
course,
there who
absolutely.
there is
Somebody
a book
and
that does that and it works, you
right,
know?
right. Well, there are these rules of writing, but
Yeah.
they're I like to call them best practices, not only practices, right? And if you consider them as like these are the best practices, most of the time they work for most things, or they're just good advice or good, we recognize it does well. But you have innovation and you have creative ways of bringing stories into the world. And when I think it's important to understand those rules so you can decide to break them consciously and with purpose, right?
Right.
So
I remember when, the first thing I ever wrote, I had like, how long should my chapters be? And what's the pinch point? And I really tried to do it like this whole laid out thing. And now my chapters are like whatever the length they are.
Right.
Whoever's talking, whatever's going on, when that piece is done, I don't care if it's 5 pages or 15 pages. Whereas first time around, I was trying to get consistent chapters, and but you have to start somewhere. Right. So, a lot of those rules, and we'll consider whether we'll put it might be neat to have some of the best practice templates on Author's Buzz, and maybe that's something we'll get to.
Yeah.
In terms of timing and pace and all of that.
And I kind of consider it like when you're a dancer. We both were dancers when we were younger, and we take that classical ballet, which a lot of people are just like, ugh, eye roll, right? I personally loved it, but I understand. They're doing that because you want the infrastructure in place. You want the skill set,
the training so that your body can do all the other
things, the other more creative things. And I kind of think about these best practice rules similarly. Like you may love them and stick with them, and it may work, and you've got Swan Lake, or you may say, no, that's not. But because I know that, my modern dance is going to be that much more enjoyable and
that's a very good analogy. Yay! Okay. I don't know what we're going to title this one.
Endings. Talking about endings. That's mostly what we did.
That's mostly what we did.
That's mostly.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Until next time.
Yeah.